All right, very good evening to all of you. I'm very sorry I couldn't take classes for you in the last few days because of my health. Um, but tonight I wanted to start from where we left in the last class, that is discussing the Naga national movement. Uh, I have already talked to you about the background of the Naga movement in the last class, as particularly the whole of the situation in which the Nagas were before the arrival of the Britishers, and also uh, their contacts with the British, particularly because of the way in which the British was trying to occupy the Naga territory, and due to which there were constant raid, and because of which the British were also irritated with the Nagas, and therefore they also started engaging with the Nagas in terms of in terms of developing this rivalry. However, in all this, I have also discussed with you that until uh, you know uh, until even the period when the British was about to leave the Naga region, the British uh, hardly administered these areas. They only kept the Naga territory as a buffer between India and China. We discussed about that, and the Naga and sorry, the British government did very little actually to change the social economic condition of the Nagas. It was primarily the Christian missionaries, especially who started the hospitals, schools, and many other social developed various other social sectors, and this in many ways actually helped in bringing about the modern political administrative development in the Naga region. And on the this is on the one side. On the other side, there was a development of the educational institutions, which also led to the rise of the educated middle class. This newly emerging class was very much different from that of the existing landed aristocrats, and they had no link with the capitalist enterprise. And gradually they rose above these tribal loyalties, or rather loyalties to their own clan, to their own ethnic groups among the Naga tribal groups. And they put the collective interest of the Nagas as their priority, and their main objective was to bring all the Nagas with all their common culture, identity, background, and so on and so forth, to bring all these common interests to the fore of their political agenda. Uh, um, in many ways, this helped the Naga to start getting exposed to the modern trajectories of development, especially with regard to the politics and economics. Uh, I've mentioned to you earlier that the Nagas also participated in the First World War, especially by registering themselves in the labor corps during, and therefore this also in many ways helped the Nagas to get exposed to modern and new ideas of nation and nationalism. In 1918, after they have returned from the First World War, they formed the Naga Club with the help of one of the British officials. And the purpose of this Naga Club again remained to be for the promoting of the Naga interest, the common Naga interest. So, and with the formation of this Naga Club, the Simon Commission was also interested in this, because the Simon Commission was now being formed in order to seek views. On one side was to modernize the Indian administration, and on the other side, there was also the agenda of seeking various views from various corners of the Indian subcontinent as to their interest after the British would rather leave the administration to the local people. So the Simon Commission also interacted, started interacting with the Naga Club to ascertain their views, especially uh, what they want with regard to their future after they leave the Indian subcontinent. The, with this opportunity, the Naga Club in 1929 submitted a memorandum to the Simon Commission. And what was the objective of this Simon with this of this memorandum? The main objective of this memorandum that was submitted to the Simon Commission in 1929, the Naga Club extorted the idea to exclude the Nagas from the political processes taking shape in Indian subcontinent. So, in response to this, the government of the British government gave upon as much as it gave upon everyone else. It gave upon the Naga people, the Naga Hills district, and excluded the Naga Hill district from other parts of India, and clubbed them in what we have been discussing time and again, excluded areas. So therefore, we know very well that under this excluded areas, laws are not, laws that are operated in other parts of the world are not to be operated in these areas, and the Nagas, they will continue to govern under their own tradition and the ways of life with the minimal interference from the provincial government. so so therefore, from the last class I've discussed with you that the Nagas fiercely fought against the British. However, that fierce enmity between the Nagas and the British gradually evolved, and gradually the Nagas accepted the panellistic rule of the British, especially through this excluded area territory domain. And gradually, with the help of the missionaries, especially because of the establishments of schools, because of establishment of hospitals, and so on and so forth, and as I said, the emergence of mass media among the Naga people, of course, initiated by the missionaries, the Nagas started to look at the British as their white men benefactors. So uh, uh, the Nagas, right from the very beginning, especially at the time when there was already the political process of India's independence, they forthrightly rejected to be part of sovereign Indian state. Their leaders were up in arms for freedom as a sovereign country after British would leave India. It is in this context that the Naga Tribal Council, which was later renamed as the Naga National Council in 1946, appealed to both to both the British and the Indian leaders to grant them independence. Okay, to grant them independence after India would also achieve independence, or after the British would, would give India its independence. They, of course, from there was negotiation time and again, British trying to convince the Nagas that, you see, it is not feasible for you to govern for yourself because of the lack of economic resources, uh, because of the small territory, because of the population, and so on and so forth. But the Naga people, right from that time on, they discarded these arguments from both sides of being small, of being underdeveloped, but they always argued that it was better for them to be left alone rather than to be included in India's independent country. Although various forms of autonomy has already been shown to the Nagas, especially through the Government of India Act, the excluded areas, and so on and so forth. But the Nagas, as I said, they constantly rejected this whole idea of autonomy, even within the Indian state. After considerable persuasion, you know, and talks with the NNC, or the Naga National Council leaders, leaders like Aliba Imti, T. Sakre, they signed a 9-point agreement in 1947 with Akbar Haidari, who was the governor of Assam then. And in this particular 9-point agreement, this is very important with regards to Nagas. We have the 9-point agreement, we have the 16-point agreement, we have the Shillong Accord, then later we have the 20-point proposal. Okay, so in this agreement, the 9-point agreement, the main point was Nagas would be with India for 10 years, and 10 years, and after 10 years of independence, Nagas will be free to decide their own future, and in subsequent years, it would be subject to this particular 9-point agreement was going to be a subject of a lot of controversies. You know, radical leaders like Zapo Fizo interpreted that the Nagas had the rights for independence after 10 years, the political rights to, to remove themselves from the Indian Union. The NNC delegation even met Mahatma Gandhi, who assured them that he would stop the Indian government from forcible occupation and the integration of Naga areas within the Indian Union unless it is accepted by the Naga people. So, uh, uh, however, as I said, the NNC rejected this whole idea of being within the Indian state, and also enraged by the Indian government disregard to the 9-point agreement. As without consulting the Naga people, they are trying to say that the Naga would be given some kind of autonomous institutions like the ADC and so on and so forth, and they would be treated under the Indian constitution. Because of all these controversies, the NNC declared independence. The night before the Indian state would declare independent on August 14, 1947, and they intimated the matter to the government of India and the United Nations organization. Despite all this, the Constituent Assembly, the Indian state, after the midnight of independence, they formed the Constituent Assembly, and this Constituent Assembly also had a separate committee under Bordoloi, known as the Bordoloi Subcommittee, and this Bordoloi, Bordoloi Subcommittee insisted that the Nagas should participate in this process of finding solution to the various ethnic groups, various autonomous ethnic groups in the northeast region. However, the NNC, they refused to send representatives to the subcommittee. They rejected the whole concept of the sixth schedule. The NNC conducted plebiscite even in the Naga Hills in 1951, and it is said that 99.9% of the Naga people voted for independence. Of course, this is a matter of debate because the Indian state did not accept this figure submitted by the NNC. Again, in 1952 election, the NNC boycotted the election, and there was hardly any election in the Naga Hills. And one very important thing that we must understand about the Naga movement, I would say right from this instance itself, is the failure of the Indian state to see this movement as a movement which has a lot of appeal, a lot of intensity into it, and genuine aspirations of the people. The Indian state from then on, even from that point, treated the Naga resistance as basically law and order situation, and they raided the houses and banned the Naga newspapers. And because of this, many of the NNC leaders, they escaped the harassment of the armed forces and they went underground. This is the starting point of the underground activity of the Naga movement. The Naga militant leaders, then started um, spreading the anti-India feeling, and they also persuaded the population to start a civil disobedience. Uh, and especially in the Tuensang division of Nefa, uh, uh, this movement was gaining ground because of the because these areas remain to be one of the most backward areas. Unfortunately, the Indian state, as I said, failed to understand the intensity of this movement, and they deployed the Assam Rifles, which was extremely violent. Uh, and therefore this incited sort of reaction in reactionary means um, from the people as well. So, so therefore, from as I said, there was a very aggressive movement from both sides. In 1956, in January 1956, T. Sakre, who was a moderate Naga leader, was murdered. He was one of those people who propagated the idea of finding a way out, especially through the formation of the Naga territory and Nagaland state and so on and so forth. Uh, After the death of T. Sikre, who is a moderate Naga leader, Zappa Fizo controlled the NNC and he formed the Federal Government of Nagaland, FGN, the Federal Government of Nagaland. In the same year, in 1956, and through this, he also initiated insurrection and the struggle for independence. Within few years, with the with which with this movement being initiated in Naga Hill district, it spread to Tuensang and it went up to the Manipur Hills, because even in Manipur Hills, large chunk of the present day Manipur Hills, over 70% of the areas is being inhabited by the Nagas. So uh, again, seeing that this movement was actually getting more ground, it is spreading to other parts of other parts of the region. The government of India deployed the army and enacted several black laws, such as the Assam Maintenance of Public Order Autonomous District Act of 1953, then the Assam Disturbed Areas Act of 1955, which was later even converted into AFSPA Act of 1958. Uh, and therefore, with all these, the armed forces were being equipped with measures, with more powers to deal with the insurgencies, and there was blatant violation of human rights. For example, acts of rapes, murder, arson, loot, forced labor was being implemented by the armed forces in order to suppress the movement. So, despite all the odds, with the Indian state imagining that this movement would die out, however, despite all this, the NNC chose to continue this struggle. And in 1963, the government of India thought that it would be seeking, getting certain feedback from from among the Naga leaders itself. They created the Nagaland, under the Ministry of External Affairs. So they created the Nagaland state, which means they divided the Naga territory. On the one side, they have given the Naga state and under the Ministry of External Affairs. And this is also because of the formation of a very important platform, that platform known as the Naga Peace Mission, which appealed, you know, which actually appealed the leaders of the NNC uh, for negotiation, and therefore, because of the Naga Peace Mission, the NNC uh, came to the negotiating table, and for 18 months, the Naga movement subsided. Or rather, you can say that for 18 months, the Naga movement was on the negotiating table. However, peace talk failed. The government of India the peace talk failed because of two important reasons. The government of India insisted the solution within the framework of the Indian Constitution, while the NNC, argued that nothing less than independence would be accepted to the people of Nagaland. So therefore, there was breakdown of talks, and which led to the replacement and the resignation of the leaders of the Federation of Federal Government of Nagaland. So in during this movement, when there was friction within the NNC, within the FGN, Kaito Sema, who was a former defense minister, who was more keen to have this negotiation, he was murdered. And Sema leaders like Kukato Sukai, Skato Su, they broke away from NNC and formed a new militant organization known as the Revolutionary Government of Nagaland in 1966. Later, this revolutionary government of Nagaland, they negotiated with the government of India and they gave up struggle. Uh, Another very important thing for us to understand when we try to look at the Naga movement is that the Naga movement have been able to survive because of the then prevailing situation, prevailing relationship between India and Pakistan and China, who uh, we can say today sort of gave moral and material support to this movement in the region. However, with the defeat of Pakistan in 1971 and the subsequent creation of Bangladesh, NNC was weakened, and internally there was internal dissension. And in 1977, the government of India also banned NNC, it banned FGN and all other militant organization. And contrary, therefore, to the spirit of the 16 point agreements, uh, which was signed, you know, uh, uh, what happened here is that the government of India also transferred the authority of the Nagaland state from the Ministry of External Affairs to the Ministry of Home Affairs. In 1975, especially with the imposition of the president's rule, national emergency, army operations also escalated, taking advantage of the situation. And during such critical period, a section of the NNC leaders signed the Shillong Accord on November 1975. So this accord in many ways created more confusion. It also led to a more critical development, especially especially when it comes to the whole movement. The accord, this Shillong Accord, stated that the underground, uh, you know, uh, on their own violation, they accept without any condition the Constitution of India, and they even agreed to surrender the arms in order to prepare the ground for future talks with the government of India. And of course, there was no official signatory, but the signatories were alleged to be close to Mr. Fizo. Fizo, of course, he, although he was aware of the whole thing, he neither endorsed nor unreservedly condemned it. So therefore, this irritated some radical leaders in the NNC. So people like Isaac Swu and Mueva, they openly denounced the Schlong Accord and and of course the Fizo leadership, and the braving all threats from the supporters of Fizo, from the supporters of the Accord. They you know they decided to carry ahead with the militant movement, and they aligned with Kaplang, a Konyak leader, and formed the National Socialist Council of Nagalum in 1980. So after the formation of the NSCN, the movement took a different phase and a different style of organization, and of course, from then on, with initial arm activity, this movement has also started reaching its, you can say, reaching its maturity. Muiva and Aisatsu, not only that they radicalized the members, but they also initiated several radical populist programs in terms of the economy, in terms of culture, in terms of politics. And because of all this, they started empowering the local Naga people, and therefore this movement became popular and powerful. So, however, in 1988, they suffered a jolt with the split of the NSN, into two camps. One belonged to Isaac Su and Muiva, IM, and the other belonging to Kaplang, okay, NSN, Kaplang, due to ideological and personality clashes. So after this, there were the Naga movement divided into four militant organization: the NNC Adino, the NNC Pongo, the NNC IM, and the NNC Kaplang. Uh, but among all these, as I said, the IM enjoyed maximum strength, and they had a major hold among the Naga population. That is, as I said, primarily because they had the organizational strength, they have military alliances, they have international, recognition. Um, they are taking the Naga movement to the international platform, making the Naga problem an international problem through various international forums. For example, like the Unrepresented Nations of People's Organization, UNPO, and the other international forums of the indigenous people. So so as I said, not only locally but even internationally, the NSCN became popular, and with that popularity, the Naga movement was also gaining international recognition, or international people. This movement was got international recognition, and of course, in the international arena, people came to know about this movement. So, therefore, from that time on, you can say that the no Naga movement or no Naga solution could have been conceived, without actually engaging with the NSC and IM. Uh, so now basically we have talked about how a little bit of how the chronology of all of this movement has the chronology of this movement. Now we talk of various important issues, starting with the courts and the negotiations, the constraints, and then the latest framework agreement in order to come to a conclusion. So, uh, uh, right from the very beginning, we cannot say that the Naga movement was left on its own. That only there was only sort of armed response from the Indian state, but the Indian state leaders have, time and again, intermittently made efforts for negotiation, even from the time of Jawaharlal Nehru himself, by uh, offering them various default mechanisms in order to include the Naga people. In 1950, the Naga People's Convention, you know, was formed by the Naga people, and they defied the NNC diktat, and they came forward, as I just mentioned, with a 16-point proposal. Nehru came forward and entered into an agreement with the Naga People's Convention in 1960. So, having seen that a proposal was coming from the ground, was coming from people who wanted peace, wanted to resolve this whole crisis, Nehru came forward. He entered into an agreement with this NPC, or the Naga People's Convention, and therefore there was a proposal for the Naga Hills in Twensang area to be and to develop these areas, and also for the formation of a separate state. So a separate state was given to the Nagas in 1960, sorry, in 1963, and within this Naga state, special provisions were given to them in the form of Article 371A, wherein all the national laws had to be accorded by the Nagaland Legislative Assembly before they become law within the Nagaland territory, especially with regard to the customs, with regard to the religious practices, with regard to their customary law, their local self-government, and so on and so forth. Uh, Government of India also accepted the Naga People's Convention proposal to have, this local self government administration within the jurisdiction of the Naga Legislative Assembly, which means the Naga Legislative Assembly will decide what form of local self-government the Nagas would have. Apart from that, the administrative of judiciary, and then the continuation of the ILP. These were some of the proposal of the Naga People's Convention that the government of India should accept, and of course the Indian government also accepted. And as I said, even placed Nagaland under the Ministry of External Affairs. So, what is the 16-point agreement? Number one, that creation of a separate state for Nagaland, developing the Naga Hills, Twensang areas, Article 371A, then local self-government, administrative judiciary, continuation of IRP. These are the few important points of the 16-point agreements, which in many ways show that the Nagas would enjoy autonomy even if they are part of the Indian Union. However, no commitment on the inclusion of the contiguous areas was being given by the Indian state. That is because this is a very, very sensitive issue. It relate to how the Indian state would have to deal with other communities as well. So, accordingly, in 1963, as I said, the bill for the creation of the Nagaland state was passed, and immediately the NNC denounced the agreement as a compromise, and they decided to continue with the struggle. So that is one part of the issues. The second important, the second efforts made, especially with regard to negotiation, with regard to finding peace and so on and so forth, was through another platform known as the Nagaland Peace Mission, of Nagaland, which was initiated by the Nagaland Baptist Church Council. In 1964, the government of India and the federal government of Nagaland signed a ceasefire agreement to facilitate peace talk. The Naga peace mission, included people like J.P. Narayan, Bimala Prasad, Chaliha, uh, then Reverend Michael Scott, and they placed certain proposal before the two parties for the pursuit of lasting peace. And proposal of you know of the mission included that the Nagas should be able to govern on their own volition and would decide to participate in the Union of India and on their own and mutually settle terms and conditions for this purpose. The government of India, on the other hand, was also expected to consider and to recast and to adopt new pattern and structures for the relationship with the Nagas, which will satisfy the political aspiration of all the sections of the Nagas. So therefore, it is a two-pronged approach. One is the Nagas on their own volition, uh, would decide to participate in the Union of India through a mutually accepted settled terms and conditions for the purpose of coming closer to India. And in India, on the other hand, should consider to recast and to adopt new patterns and structures of relationship with the Nagas. This is the condition to satisfy the political aspirations of all sections of the Nagas. J.P. Narayan, however, he clarified. He said that this volition is not unconditional. Uh, he said that the part of agreement on the pattern of relationship between the Nagaland and the government of India is very clear. You know that both sides have to take initiative. Reverend Michael Scott, who was rather considered as a supporter of the Naga militant, he he made an argument to put forward his point to say that the uh, Nagas are already enjoying considerable autonomy in the Indian Union, especially in matters that affect them the most. And he insisted that since Nagaland had no economic resources, for enabling the society, the Naga leaders, it would be honest on their part to face these facts of life and to therefore pursue a policy to bring peace to the people. So, for Reverend Scott, the question of peace was important rather than egoistic, position based on their ideological position. He said this is important in order to achieve progress and peace, and also for a clear conception and a precise picture of what is meant by independence and sovereignty. However, he also insisted that the government in India should not constantly insist that everything should be done within the framework of the Indian Constitution. He said there was nothing sacrosanct about the Constitution. He said what is needed to be insisted is a solution within the Indian Union and not necessarily within the Indian Constitution. This is, you can say, is this particular suggestion given by Reverend Scott is the is basically the benchmark of the framework agreement that the Naga leaders are actually having with the government of India today, while they are also on the verge of coming out with solutions after they have signed a framework agreement in 2015 with the NDA government under Narendra Modi. Okay, so therefore he also suggested Scott also suggested a different form of relationship that India and Naga could think of. He said, um, giving them sovereign status and at the same time, retaining them within the confederation within the Indian Union. This is important. Giving them sovereign status and at the same time retaining them within the confederation or within the Indian Union. This should be the modus operandi, or this could have been the way forward. Okay, so, and as I said, this is actually basically what today's peace process talk is happening between the government of India and the leaders of the NSC and in Delhi. So, as I said, despite sincere efforts from the peace mission and due to misapprehensions from both sides, reluctant to think from both sides, reluctant to think and act above, their own stated position, led to the failure of this second effort to bring about peace. The third important person, and I must say this also contributed immensely to the maturity of this negotiation between the government of India and the Naga leaders. That is the suggestion of a person known as Rungsang Suisa. So Rungsang Suisa, who was a moderate Tangkul Naga leaders, also popularly known as Uncle Suisa. You know, after consulting with Indira Gandhi, he came up with an idea of what he called as the federal agreement. So he said, under this federal agreement, the administration of certain subjects like defense, foreign relationship, communication, extra, could be retained within the government of India, and all other subjects of immediate significance to Nagaland should be given to the Naga people, and that should be the way forward. That should be the middle ground for talks. He also suggested that Nagaland uh, would not take should not take steps inimical to the interest of India, and that India should also assist Nagaland, especially in being a self-sufficient region, a self-sufficient state, or a self-sufficient nation for that matter. Uh, he sent this proposal to the FGN, or the federal government of Nagaland, and the government of India, and in 1988, when the Indian emissary came to NSCN with this proposal along the line of Suisa's proposal, unfortunately NSCN split, and the Kaplang faction was born with the allegation that Muiwa and Aisatsu was surrendering the Naga interest in the hands of the Indian state. However, Aisatsu and Muiwa, they denounced the allegation and swore by their commitment for Naga independence. So it took another, as I said, although this suggestion was very important, it has a lot of relevance to it. It has a lot of essence into it. Yet, it took another 2 decades for the NCNIM leadership to accept that there was substance, in this proposal. So during the emergency, some Naga leaders, they came out again, to negotiate with the government of India, and they concluded the very popular accord known as the Shillong Accord of 1975. That is primarily because during this particular time, as I mentioned earlier, Indira Gandhi took a lot of advantage, imposing national emergency and using the armed forces to suppress the movement and so on and so forth. And the representatives of the underground, a section of the representative of the underground, who were already tired or who were exhausted by all this struggle, they came forward to sign on their own volition and accept. And the agreement says that they accept the Constitution of India on their own volition, and they hand over arms. They were also ready to hand over arms and formulate issues for final settlement with the government of India. Uh, However, as I said, it is very much understood that this accord very much argued that this accord was signed under duress, as it was not signed officially by the NSC and or sorry, the NNC and the FGN. The accord therefore intensified the ideological and leadership struggle, which led, as I told you, led to the formation of NSCN, and of course in 1988, this also split because of the alleged acceptance of the Suisa's proposal. Uh, of course, the NNC already disassociated themselves from the signatories of the accord. But as I said, as the NNC weakened, uh, insurgency became more organized under the NSCN. From resistance, which earlier was confined to Nagaland, now it is spread to Assam, to Arunachal Pradesh, and to Manipur. Thus, the Indian state realized that peace could not be entered into an accord with, just a section of the militant. So, just a section of the militant organization. So, no accord with individuals unless Nagas perceive that as equal, just, and honorable. You know, equality, justice, and honor is the three important cornerstone of the talks with the Naga people. As I said, it took 2 decades for the government of India also to, to understand, to change its position, and with structural change in the regional and the international scenarios, both the government of India and the Naga gradually had to reconsider their own position. Because you see, at the international level, there was the world events like the collapse of the Soviet Union, the disappearance of the socialist state, socialist blocs, the emergence of the unipolar polar world, and then the strengthening of the market forces, globalization, and so on and so forth. So all these force India also to revise its its strategies, to revise its security strategy and development strategies, focusing, or rather shifting its focus towards the east. uh, at the domestic level, India was also facing a foreign exchange crisis in 1990s. Growing strength of the Indian monopoly. There was also growing strength of the Indian monopoly. There was also need for new markets. All this process of liberalization, globalization, made India to look east for economic growth and opportunities. Look east means what? Look east means the importance of northeast states uh, became more significant for the Indian state. So, therefore, understanding the historical, geographical, and the racial, cultural link of the region with countries like China and other Asian countries was considered as asset for India. Therefore, to consider India while considering policy towards Lokis, it was also becoming important for the Indian state to think about the um, about building relationship with different communities, with different organizations, with different ethnic groups, especially recasting their approach towards insurgency in the region was one of the most important thing. So they and why is that important? That is also important because if India wanted to build relationship with Southeast Asian countries, there is also a need for effective governance in the region for the development of welfare policies in the Northeast region as a whole. So therefore, as I said, India realized that insurgency, all these political problems are not to be considered as law and order problem, but rather negotiating peace with these insurgent groups becoming more and more important. And among all of them, NSCN was the most alive, active, organized, and powerful. So therefore, priority of settlement of peace with NSC and IM, NSC and UK was one of the most important ways in which India could actually recast its foreign relations, foreign policies, international relations, creating new markets, and so on and so forth. So Naga militant to realize that while on the one side India was being constrained by all these, India was seeing opportunities through low-caste policy, and the militant organization also realized that solution was only going to be achieved through peaceful and political method. So they also realized that there is no sovereignty through violent means, and Naga people, both the insurgent and and the Indian armed forces have been the Naga people realized that both these forces, whether it is the Naga movement or the armed forces, they were violating their rights. They left them divided, factional, on tribal lines, and therefore they were left backward. So therefore, it's better for us. Naga people realize that 5 decades of struggle have already gone. Uh, Now, voluntary organization with the Indian economic policies, the politics have also made most of the Nagas, more sort of uh, moderate. They were gradually accepting the whole idea of integration with the Indian state, uh, and they want to, people also realize that there is a need for, uh, taking advantage from each other. So aversion and suspicion among between Nagas and the inner state also declined because of education and of course mass media and films and several civil societies organization also played very important role. Organizations like the Naga Ho, the Naga Students Federation, the Naga People's Movement for Human Rights, the United Committee for of Manipur, the All Naga Students Association of Manipur, all played important roles. All of them then, from then on, became part and parcel of this negotiation for having a permanent solution, and they started building an atmosphere of peace and reconciliation. And of course, decades later, uh, from the NNC, the chiefs, the church having authority or having influence. Now the civil society also play important role, especially in the pursuing the insurgent group towards developing certain kind of ideology, certain kind of approaches. The Naga people, which have suffered considerably because of insurgency, counter-insurgency, they were also fed up and tired. And in 2003, they revolted against the militant, especially through their because of their excesses in the in an incident in Mokuchung and Tuensang, which indicated the limit that the public can actually accept these militant organization. So as I said, at the regional level, the birth of Bangladesh was also a major drawback for the NSNIM. Then the changing uh, anti-terrorist policies of the USA after September 2011 made liberation struggle impossible to achieve, especially using violent means. So practical difficulties like the geographical areas, the economy, independence of from India was becoming difficult in the light of the prevailing situation. You know, both sides agreed to come to the negotiating table and Prime Minister PV Narasimha Rao, Devegowda, Ike Gujral, they negotiated peace, and in 1997 there was the beginning of almost a long-lasting ceasefire, you know, and initially it was only for 3 months. Then it got extended periodically to facilitate talks. So these talks initially it happened in the third country. It happened in Bangkok, in Osaka, in Amsterdam, in Zurich, in Geneva, Kuala Lumpur, and many other places. In 2003, however, the IM leadership, for the first time, they came to India to hold a discussion with the Indian leadership. And later, Prime Minister Vajpayee visited Naga, and he announced that India recognized the unique history of the Nagas, and he expressed that his government support for the peace process. In 2004, the UPA government under Manmohan Singh also initiated talks with the IM leadership on at the political level. The IM leadership also visited Nagaland and held talks with the civil societies. They spent 6 months in India, and they were taking feedback from the people, and the Indian government also treated them as leaders, not as terrorists, but as leaders, as political representative of the Naga nation. You see, as a Naga nation, and on their part, the Naga leaders also showed a huge amount of maturity. They came close to India politically, and therefore, as far as possible, they argued that and they expected that India would, respect them their basic concern as expectations. So, of course, during this period, in 2011, Moiwa wanted to go to Manipur, but because of certain irritants in Manipur and showing maturity, he declined to go there. And so, how to overcome limitations? What are the limitations? As I said, there are various limitations. One of them is the apprehensions of difficulties and compulsions. For example, the question of sovereignty, whether Naga issue should be discussed within the Indian Constitution or outside the Indian Constitution. Within the Indian Constitution, the Nagas were not ready to accept. They have rejected the Autonomous Council. They have rejected the statehood. They have rejected, of course, Indira Gandhi. Indira Gandhi also proposed a Bhutan type of, autonomy status, to which the Naga rejected at the point of time. The Suisa's proposal was also rejected. So, so, uh, so of late, Muiva, some sort of under Muiva, some sort of special federal relationship with the Indian Union has begun outside the constitutional framework of India. And although the NSC and IM obtained consent of different Naga tribal Hoho from from the continuation of peace talk on behalf of Nagas. The question is whether both sides they would be able to convince all other parties to agree, on the issues of independence. And it's not very clear, but it shows that of late the NSCN has talk of different nature of sovereignty. For example, R.N. Ravi, who was the interlocutor, he insisted on sovereignty lies with the people. He says sovereignty lies with the people. So another very important constraint and difficulty for this Naga peace process talk is the integration of Naga inhabited areas. As we all know that although there are differences among the Nagas on the issues of sovereignty, integration of Naga inhabited areas, including those outside Nagaland, is a unanimity. Nagas may disagree with some Nagas may disagree with the question of sovereignty, yet with the question of integration of Naga inhabited areas. All of them they agree. Even the Naga State Assembly have passed several resolutions. The United Naga Council, the All Naga Student Association of Manipur, all of them they insist on all this. But as I said, this creates difficulty for the Indian state, especially because they have to deal with people of Arunachal, Asmis, the Meitei, and so on and so forth, who are opposed to uh, any attempt of the Indian state to take away the land and the property. So unless all these things are agreed, there is hardly any solution to all these issues, and Nagas at no point of history had uh, had accepted anything less than this. Yet, many others have argued that Nagas at no point of history had a sense of nationality, a sense of national territory, sense of nationalism. It was only after the British arrived that the Naga Hill district was created. Through that, with the emergence of Naga Club and so on and so forth, the whole of the Naga identity was born. So therefore, so therefore, many efforts are being made to integrate the Naga territory, as well as to also bring unity among them for the sake of this Naga nationalism. So, cutting the story short, it's already 1 hour. Mm, as I said, on the one side, the Indian state have tried measures to actually divide the Nagas, but on the other side, the Naga national leaders have tried to bring about unity among the Nagas. Of course, one of the ways that the Naga national leaders have tried is to to unite the Nagas on the basis of religion, and therefore they, with the help of the Baptist Peace Fellowship of North America, they brought out the slogan of Nagaland for Christ, unity, to bring about unity of all the Naga people, and with this, therefore, the NSN IM was thought of a slogan that would bring the Naga people together. And with this, the NSCM also had a second objective in mind, that is to bring all the nationalist forces together, even those who are inimical to them, those who have been enemies in the past. NSCM wanted to bring all of them on Mao's strategy of winning all. On we have read this on contradiction, where he call all the nationalists to come together. All the nationalists to come together. So so therefore, at every level, there have been efforts by the Naga national leaders towards, consolidating this particular voice. And on the part of the Indian state, as I said, there have been limitations. There are still limitations. We have mentioned some of those limitations. Integration is one of the most difficult aspect. Uh, uh, Negotiating talks outside the Indian constitution is another limitations, and the another important limitations that the Indian state has is particularly to come out with a solution that would, in a way, be agreeable to all the forces, the Naga forces of this Naga national movement. So let me come to the present stage. In the present stage, as I told you, in 2015, there have been the signing of the Indo-Naga Peace Framework Agreement under the leadership of Galing Muiva uh, on the one side, and R.N. Ravi as the Indian interlocutor, on August 3rd, 2015. So we can say that this is a culmination of 80 rounds of negotiations, which lasted for over 2 decades. And this year, like in the past, the government has acknowledged the unique history and culture of the Nagas. It has also promised to restore the pride and privilege of the Nagas within the Confederacy to be characterized by shared sovereignty. Earlier we were talking about sovereignty, now characterized by shared sovereignty, which means there is a new way forward. There's a new way forward. So it appears that Naga leaders, they have left aside the question of Nagaland to affirm to the Indian Constitution, and also they have agreed to the whole idea that sovereignty lies with the people. And PM Modi made a statement during this signing of this accord where he says a spirit of equality, respect, trust, and confidence would be important. So now, what is the although the framework agreement is not clear, but it seems that the idea behind is the pan-Naga government with non-territorial jurisdiction, just like the one we have seen in the Bodoland. So therefore, there will be a pan-Naga government with non-territorial jurisdiction, covering all Naga inhabited territories. And this is the core issue of the agreement. And the agreement also explicitly, as I mentioned to you earlier, acknowledged the primary culture as entrenched in the unique history of the Nagas, that question of shared sovereignty. So therefore, almost to what I mentioned earlier, to what Reverend Scott has argued, what Suisa has argued, the NSCN-IM now has toned down, and they said they are talking about the asymmetric federalism. They also talk of the Naga integration, but areas that cannot be brought under it could be covered by the pan-Naga or pan-Naga Ho, which means that in areas beyond the Nagaland, the government of India will institute institutions where they will have most of the subjects pertaining to the Naga population would be taken care by the pan-Naga Ho, which means it's like a government with no territory. Right. So this would be an independent body. It would be a statutory body with executive authority, as I said. It will have separate budget and negotiating power, and it also agreed to share competencies in difference to the Naga people with their sovereign rights. So therefore, which means that this is basically what it means, that there will be two kind of regime, the Naga regime and the government of India would jointly explore and exploit various aspects, especially with regard to mineral resources. The framework agreement, as I said, has been taken out of the 20-point charter of demand put forward by the NSCN-IM. Some of which I can note down here. That an Indian constitution would define co-federal relationship with India. So which means NSCN-IM now would accept the Indian constitution, which would have defined co-federal relationship with India. Okay, which means certain amount of autonomy is would be given to them. Here, therefore, just like what Suisa has proposed, areas like defense would be a joint subject, and there would be no war policy, by India. The external affairs which do not affect Nagas would be in the hands of the Indian government. Police and judicial matters will be created, and wherever it affects the Nagas, it will be Nagas. Wherever it affects the Indian state, it will be joint. And with regard to the question of immigration, like the restricted area permit, this would be repealed to allow currency, to allow the movement of people from both sides, and the currency will remain to be Indian currency. And in terms of trade, there will be joint economic development of India and Nagaland, to promote trade, investment, joint ventures, and so on and so forth. And natural resources would be completely under the Nagas, and then the Nagas also propose to have their own separate flag, and to have the joint foreign affairs as well as to have the permanent UN representative. So these are the new framework, which, as I said, was taken out of the context of the proposal given by Uncle Suisa of the Naga peace mission, under Reverend Michael Scott and others. And the context is basically a toned down context from both the side. While the Indian state have now agreed to have a federal talks, based on shared sovereignty. The Naga leadership have also accepted that outside of the Indian state, totally outside the Indian state would be difficult for them. So therefore, it is better to have a negotiation on the shared, question of shared sovereignty. So therefore, all in all these, what I can say is that uh, there is already a sense of maturity from both sides, and hopefully, just like we have seen in the case of the Bodoland, solutions will also come for the case of the Nagas in recent times. So once again, thank you very much.